Mr. Jones, happy birthday to the Navy.
Was that today? Navy
Yeah,
Day?
it was one day this week. Yeah, one day this week.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were in Marines, right?
Yeah.
The men's department today. We had a friend of ours who was in the Marines, and that's what he joked that it was the men's department of the Navy. She said, here you go.
Try to tell them what's wrong. Never had a conversation with them. Especially this one guy went to school at St. Michael's up there in Independence. So he used to talk about Mary, worship Mary. He used to tell him all about his church.
Looks like we lost half our side over there. Up there. Yeah. Temporary dietary yearnings. Transitory.
This Denver, I think it was a Denver, he's some sort of Democratic Party official, volunteer, whatever. He's also a leader of some radical communist organization. They caught him on hidden camera talking about, openly planning to commit violence. He said, people on the right don't realize how many of us on the left are armed and trained and ready to go. And he said, if Joe Biden, doesn't do what we want, we have option one, what we're proposing, option two, slicey boys. Bring out the guillotines. Literally said, we're going to bring out the guillotines.
Project Veritas video.
Yeah, they confronted him. He said, yeah, I stand by all that. You people are, to start cussing and walk off. Can you imagine if that was a Republican that got caught saying that? We hear about it for 5 years.
Could you imagine if think about this, could you imagine if there was a Republican candidate for president whose son was implicated in taking money from foreign criminal oligarchs and communist governments and sharing 50% of it with his dad?
Wasn't that like $50 million? We never hear the end of it.
Well, in the one email, he said that he was telling his daughter, he said, I'm not like Pop, I'm not taking 50%.
But what was the amount? 50 million?
Well, I don't know what the total amount was, but he said that his dad was taking 50% of his dad's cut.
Connection
He
fees.
knew nothing about oil and energy.
And then the guy that the Ukrainian criminal sent him an email thanking him for getting him, connected with his dad.
Yeah.
And of course they said, oh, well, it's not on his schedule. Well, there's these vacant spots on his schedule at every time that he was supposed to have met with this guy. So they had the time, but they didn't put it on the schedule. And now, and that's just the Ukrainian side of things. On the Chinese side of things, there's every bit and more. Talking about how, and send another 10 for the big man.
My guy.
Refer
to him as my guy.
But there was no one, the big man or the big guy. And also there's another something amount for Jay. Well, yeah, that would be his uncle, Joe Biden's brother James. And the big guy, I don't know if you'll be able to get through here.
I can.
Yeah, the big guy would be Joe Biden, and Jay was probably James Biden. And these are payoffs from a communist government. Well, of course, there's nothing to see there. The only thing that's there is Putin working with Trump to throw the election again.
Second.
Yeah.
Pastor, we're in such a deceitful time of spiritual battle right now.
Oh, it is.
And, you know, if you're not confronted with someone in your family or someone even in your own local church that is being deceived, it's coming. Because
Yeah.
I've been seeing it everywhere in my own family. I'm sure a lot of you guys are seeing the same thing, but Wayne and I were here at where we usually go before we come here. We go, and then they have CNN on, and I never have CNN. I don't have any cable, but I wanted to watch it just for 10 minutes just to see. They're saying what you're talking about. Their headline and what they were talking about is that the Trump campaign is running a disinformation campaign against the Biden family.
Yeah.
And people like my family, I'm not gonna name their names right now, but just pray for them, because they're so lost and blind.
Oh, I know
They think-
people who
They
think that,
think
yeah.
I'm blind. They
Yeah.
think that we're totally
They believe what CNN
totally
is saying.
blind, and they think that we're brainwashed,
Mhm.
but they admit that's what they watch. They watch CNN and MSNBC, and then it went right in from that, right over to the coronavirus and all the misinformation.
Uh-huh.
CNN is talking about that, you know, and so I just got, so I look at that, because I don't, like I said, I never see it. Doesn't come into any of my feeds, but, and it just made me sorrowful. It just made me sad that so many people are locked into that. And
Oh, yeah.
By
Amen.
But,
Yes.
oh, go ahead.
They had a statistic out today about the number of Democrats or people registering as Democrats in the state of Ohio in the last week or so. Far outpaced the number of Republicans registering.
That is kind of interesting, because I have seen some other statistics that say on a national basis, the Republicans have registered far more people. But things change all the time. For instance, in Ohio, I think they can't do any more in Ohio because registration's closed unless they're registered for the next election. But they are expecting, even the Democrats are saying this, on election day, it'll be a huge Republican turnout. But mail-in ballots, that's surprise, surprise, are going to be a huge Democrat.
One more thing. before we do. My grandson just came back from, he's working in Reno. They come back home once a month. And he said he's staying in a hotel. And they sent him a ballot for a minute. You know,
Yeah, I mean, that's the mail-in ballot. That's the difference between the mail-in ballot and the absentee ballot. They're just sending one to everybody. It probably was.
yeah, I never got my absentee ballot, and I filed for it in August.
Well,
And they're saying on the 1100 news that Cuyahoga County, oh, they had a problem with the printer. Don't worry, we're sending them out. And they said, a woman from the Board of Elections was on, and she said, well, if you show up on election day, we're gonna check if we mailed you that ballot, or if you registered even, and if you did, then you're not allowed to vote. It'll be the provisional vote.
well, yeah, see, it was kind of misleading what she said. You're not allowed to vote. You're absolutely allowed to vote. You vote a provisional ballot. And what they do is that provisional ballot goes into a folder rather than in the machine to be counted right then. Those provisional ballots then go back to the Board of Elections, and what they do is they check the information on the envelope of the provisional ballot, because see, like for instance, those of us who are working at the polls and you show up and you say, well, I never got my ballot. I have no way of verifying or knowing that. Anybody could say that. So I said, well, here's a provisional ballot. You vote, it's the same exact ballot, but you don't put it in the machine. You bring it back and it goes in the provisional envelope. That ballot then goes to the Board of Elections, and they verify your identity which is on the envelope. When they verified your identity, they check and see if they got an absentee ballot in the mail for you. So that because some people forget that they sent it in. I mean, that happens. It does. There's people who forget. I've had people come in and say, I honestly don't know whether I sent it in or not. And so we give a provisional. So if the Board of Elections has absentee ballot here and they have your provisional here, thank you. Then they'll toss your provisional and use your absentee.
It's just Cuyahoga County, it's already curious. They
Yeah,
haven't sent out the absentee ballots.
yeah. But what,
And
yeah,
here we're coming.
but she
on
shouldn't
2
have
weeks
told you
away.
your vote won't count. You can't vote, you know.
Yeah.
She should have said, we'll vote you a provisional ballot. You can absolutely vote, it'll be a provisional, so they can make sure. And then if they find you never sent an absentee ballot in, then they run your provisional through the machine and your ballot is counted. So, so that was wrong of them to say that your vote won't count, or you can't vote.
Yeah, please choose basically anyhow.
Your
Yeah.
relative in, Reno, how was that ballot addressed? Was it addressed to occupant?
You know, I will have to ask him, I don't know.
That would really be crazy.
Was it? Yeah, I'll ask him.
Well, they send them to tests in some places.
Well, if it's sent to occupant, can't they check, and then it's the only one occupant is allowed to be counted in this county?
But it is a motel.
Oh, I know, I mean, it's just amazing. How many people were there that day that got one and then decided to send it in?
Yeah, of course.
Well, changing the subject a little bit, I'd like to tell you what happened in Euclid this week. I don't think you know. 4 juveniles came from Cleveland into Euclid to rob the Dunkin' Donuts. And they saw the gun tucked in the waist, called the police and caught the 3. The 4th one took off. So he was in the bushes, they caught him, but they couldn't find the gun. But they looked on the surveillance and they saw a car that had parked right there, shut its lights off. It was his mother. She had the gun and she was, yeah, the mother. So that's taking those kids
Well,
into Euclid. And
They're
it's
underage, so if
felony
they get
too.
caught, they're in the juvenile program rather than her getting thrown in
She
jail.
got arrested too.
She should have,
And
yeah.
it's a felony because they had a gun.
Well, I think that they're after 14 years are considered an adult now, so.
Mhm.
Tried adults.
Yeah,
So,
but, do be in prayer because there's more and more things coming out in the media about potential unrest after the election.
Oh, boy.
We have people openly planning it.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying, it's coming out in the media more and more now. So, yeah, they are openly planning and we know that, but the media is starting to let little more of it dribble out. But they're trying to prep it that Trump is behind it. If you notice in these debates and these town halls and things, why won't you, will you condemn the violence? They never asked Biden that. And see, they know what they're doing. They're doing the same thing that the prosecutor does in the courtroom where he says, all right, Bob, why did you beat the skunk and steal the fish? Like, what skunk? What fish? The judge says, there's no basis in that. Throw that out. The jury will ignore that question. But it's in the minds of them now. You can't take it out of their mind. So they say this nonsense, and it's in the minds. It's just like when Biden and that thing last night, his little love fest, he again brought up the things trying to say that Trump told everybody to inject bleach in their arm. Well, they keep saying that. They know it's not true, but they say it because they know people are listening and they'll believe it. And the same thing, Guthrie was accosting Trump on the his racism and his refusal to say anything against the white supremacists and all. And how many times does he have to do it? He says he's always saying things that, about that. And yet they keep saying you never say it. Well, they know that's not true. They're not that stupid. But they know that people listening don't know this and they'll think that it's true.
it wasn't a debate, it's more like a trial.
Yeah, he was debating. And then this whole thing with Biden's son and Biden himself, Facebook, well, some of it's been on Facebook, because I posted some on Facebook, it's still there. But Twitter has just eliminated, they just censored it. And Facebook has censored a good bit of it. Or in one of the ways they censored is they shadow it, which means you might see it on your feed where you posted it, but nobody else does. Or maybe a very tiny percentage of people do. So that you don't know that it's shadow banned necessarily.
There's a thing called Rule 260 or 820. Did you see about that? Where, remember that kid with the guy with the drum was beating that and he won a lawsuit?
Right.
Well, social media groups like Twitter and Facebook, you can't sue them because of this rule.
Yeah, they're a platform rather than a publisher. Because of that rule, yeah.
Yeah.
And the difference is a newspaper like the Cleveland Plain Dealer, for instance, is a publisher. So when they publish something, they have to stand behind what they publish because it's their material. But if you have a community bulletin board and anybody's allowed to put anything on there, then the person who owns the bulletin board is not responsible because it's a platform. Anything can be posted on it. So you're either a platform or a publisher. They're trying to have the best of both. If you're a publisher, you can be sued for false information that you publish, especially if you know that it's false. If you're a platform, you can't be sued. In a sense, the people who make the roads can't sue because somebody gets drunk and drives down the wrong way on the highway. You see what I'm saying? Because the road is just a platform for you to drive on. You can
why
use that
not?
as an analogy.
There's no law and order anymore.
I know. But yeah. So anyway, if you put up signs say drunk drivers welcome, now you could be sued. But what I'm getting at is, yeah, Facebook and Twitter are supposed to be platforms, so they can't be sued for publishing false information because they're not publishing anything. They're a utility. And if somebody chooses to use the utility wrongly, it's not their fault. Just like if somebody decides to use the electricity coming out of the outlet wrongly, it's not the power company's fault. And so if somebody decides to leave the gas on in somebody's house to blow it up, well, that's not the gas company's fault. They just provide the service. How the service is used is up to the individual people.
And how do they, like, I posted something from a pastor about the Hunter Biden stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Facebook said they took it down, they
Yes.
communicated with me and said that's all.
Because they're trying to act like a publisher and said they're trying to have it both ways, and you can't. This is why they need to be investigated now. Because,
before Congress.
yeah, because Twitter locked up the president's Twitter account. Now, he's got, they locked up the president's too, as well as the press secretary. The president has millions of people who follow him on Twitter. He's got more people follow him on Twitter than watch CNN. And this tells us that Twitter has decided that they're part of the Biden campaign. And it tells us that Facebook has decided they're part of the Biden campaign.
Which senator is that, who ran for president, that's bringing that to light, that investigates that?
Cruz. Senator Cruz. Ted Cruz, yeah. Yeah. Certainly not Romney. To quote Biden, not that, that Mormon guy that was governor. Remember him saying that the other day? When he was in Toledo, wasn't it? Yeah, he was in Toledo. The same day that he just said that he's running for senator.
Yeah.
That was earlier this week, remember? He was in Toledo, he was running for senator.
Who said that about Romney?
Biden, yeah.
Huh?
It's not cold.
No.
I think it'd be interesting if Trump started saying stuff like that. I'm running for
That's what I
senator.
noticed.
To watch the
Well,
media
so
go
far,
crazy.
Biden's running for senator in South Carolina
I thought
and
maybe
Ohio.
somehow got unplugged like that.
So,
And if he wins enough of those races, he'll be president.
Yeah.
The progressive's running.
So maybe the Federal Elections Commission should consider this as a contribution in kind.
Well, you know, one would ask why they don't do that.
Needs to be appropriately declared and all.
Oh, that's Ralph.
Yeah.
We had our county leader meeting for Free Ohio Now on Tuesday. And I'm not the only one who's noticing an increase in hostility and violence. They had people get out of cars and scream in their faces in, I think, Lake and Cuyahoga counties. And a couple of the other county leaders said same thing. Seems like the other side's getting less restraint.
Can you say that again about violence in Free Ohio?
So we had a Zoom call, a Free Ohio Now County Leaders Meeting to try to coordinate, look, this is what we're trying to do, everybody. And if you have, hey, did this work for you or did this work for you kind of thing? And when I told Tom Patch, one of the state leaders, that it seems like they're getting more and more aggressive. It's more, there's more open.
Violently attacking your group?
Well, I mean, Maria did get hit with a water balloon on last Saturday. They threw, last Saturday, she got hit with a water balloon. The week before that, they tried to hit Neil with a cup of ice water. But I guess some of the other county leaders in their like roadside flagways and stuff have also noticed the last 3 or 4 weeks, there was like the fringe radicals that would drive by and yell at you, but it's more than that now. Like we had organized opposition with obscene signs, professionally printed obscene signs across the street. We had multiple organized, counter protesters. We had 4 at one point across the street.
Trying to hit you or
No. I mean, it's pretty stupid to try to hit someone who's openly armed with multiple weapons, but which is the reason I do it. But to be honest,
That must be why I was the target.
yeah. Sorry.
Well, we know Maria was a target because she was in trouble.
Yeah. Troublemaker, Maria.
But yeah, it's like I'm not the only one who's noticed that they're getting worse.
The real violence, I think, is gonna get when they mandate the vaccines, because you hear on the radio, they're promoting the vaccine with their advertising already. It's brought to you by Big Pharma, and their tagline is "Science has the answer back to normal." Science, not God, science. And I've been polling coworkers, people, are you gonna take the vaccine? No, I'm not gonna take that vaccine. I'm gonna take the vaccine. Sure, I'm gonna take the vaccine. If it means getting back to normal, I'm gonna take the vaccine. I'm gonna take the vaccine. No, I'm not gonna take the vaccine.
What is that?
You already have a huge anti-vaxxer community out there, Christian or non-Christian, doesn't matter. They're totally against it. If the government forces people to put something in their body that they don't wanna take, that's gonna be a whole different level of,
Virginia has already said that they're going to do that.
people are gonna push back, and they're gonna use force. They're not gonna take it lightly.
Well, this is why it's so important to have appropriate people on the courts, because it'll be
Mhm.
run through the courts.
Well, we'll see, because Trump's even used pretty loose language about it.
Well, there's 3 or 4 companies out there doing this, and they're not all the same vaccine.
Mhm.
So
That's what I mean.
wouldn't it make a difference as to which company it's coming from?
And what type of vaccine it is, because some vaccine might be good, but I wouldn't take one from Gates.
Never. That's an excellent point. And again, people are totally blinded by it. Gates is in the media this week making his talks about how America's handling the virus and what we're doing right and wrong. You know, and again, we're not gonna get back to normal until the world is vaccinated. That's what's coming out of his mouth.
Well, but they're also laying the groundwork saying that's not gonna be enough. They're actually looking beyond the vaccine now, saying, even if we get everybody vaccinated, it's not gonna be enough because this virus mutates. That's why you get a flu vaccine. For those who do, they get a shot each year because it mutates. It's a different version. It's not always the same version. And there are some rare cases where somebody that's had COVID re-gets it several months later because the strain that they had is sufficiently different.
How convenient.
Well, I mean, that happens with the flu all the time. I mean, this is not an unusual thing. That's why you
That's
can,
what, the thing with viruses.
that's why you can get a head cold more than once in your life.
Sure.
You get the chicken pox once in your life and that's it.
Well, that's like-
Because that one
it's
doesn't
just-
mutate like the cold, the virus that gives you the cold or the flu.
It's just, all these factors are just so.
But that's what I said, they're already prepping, saying that, oh no, we're still gonna have to do this and we're still gonna have to do that. Because the whole thing isn't about a vaccine, and it isn't about a mask, and it isn't about restrictions. It's about bringing in a totalitarian world government. It's setting the stage for the Antichrist.
And we as Christians ought to be rejoicing, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Because
When you see these things begin to happen, Jesus said, do what? Look up for your redemption draweth nigh.
Amen.
And that's where we ought to be with this. And that's your trying to
Did
do.
anybody hear Governor DeWine say, we are at halftime now? So we're at halftime.
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear that.
Yeah, I heard him actually say that. So that means he must have really extended for me.
Oh, yeah. no, that
I'd
was-
just like to point out the charts I posted. That's from the coronavirus.ohio.gov, the deaths attributed to coronavirus. You know, on the right-hand side is today, on the left-hand side is when it started.
You can see how much worse it is today if you look at the right-hand side of the chart. Look how much worse it is today than it was in May, when you didn't have to wear a mask.
People must stop.
Although, I do have to admit, Dr. Fauci said that Americans, oh, you got a cord there hooked on your heel. There it goes. Dr. Fauci said that Americans need to cancel their Thanksgiving plans.
Oh, yeah.
I have done this. I was gonna invite Dr. Fauci for Thanksgiving. I canceled it. I've canceled my invitation to him. So I listened to the doctor. I followed the science and I canceled my Thanksgiving plan to invite Dr. Fauci for Thanksgiving. So I hope he's proud of me.
Science is
But
real.
I encourage you to do the same thing. If you had plans to invite him for Thanksgiving, cancel it.
And we've seen these things on Facebook, you know, those of us, those of the leftists are screaming at the conservatives, follow the science, follow the science. We say, okay, if you believe in science so much, why don't you want to believe that there are only two genders and that life begins at conception?
Amen.
Yeah, very good point.
That's inconvenient for them.
Did anybody catch any of the Biden debate when that woman got up and was talking about her two daughters, 1 8 and 1 10, and the 8 was
Yeah,
having
transgender.
gender
Mhm.
dysphoria.
I heard that, and I turned the channel at that
I
time.
got,
Yeah, I
I
watched
turned
that.
immediately.
And he wants to make it possible. There's actually people who have the view that we should make it possible for an 18-month-old to transgender. You know, 18-month-olds, they know what they want to be. They just know at 18 months.
Well, there are a lot of women who want to raise their sons as
Exactly.
daughters. And
Exactly.
100 years ago, it wasn't uncommon to see little boys in dresses. That was common.
When we were in the Samoan Islands, they have an institution called the Fa'afafine, which literally means man who wants to be a woman. And families with a lot of boys will take one of their young sons from the time they're just a baby, start treating them as a girl. The Yinglings, who were with us, they had a little boy, he was a baby when they got there, and they were asked,
She was a toddler.
or a toddler, they were asked many times, oh, are you gonna raise him as a boy or a girl? The reason now, this is something that goes back for over 1,000 years in the Samoan culture, probably thousands of years in the Polynesian culture. The purpose of the Fa'afafine, raising a little boy as a girl, and they do, they put him in dresses, they sit with the girls in church, they sing with the girls in the choir at church, churches all endorse it, and they sit with the girls in school, they treat them like girls, and they do this. Now, this is not somebody making something up from, somebody who hates transgender and all that. This is the culture, over 1,000-year-old culture. They do this because the Papafines, they believe, are better at cooking and decorating the house. It almost sounds like you're making this up. Sewing and fixing the clothes and everything. And that's why they like them. Because they, as a group, they believe they're better at these things. See, generally speaking, when you have a stereotype, there's a basis in fact. Might just be a tiny basis, but when you think about it, a 1,000+ year tradition that says men who want to be girls are better decorators and better at cooking and designing things. Do you begin to see where there might be a basis in fact for some things in our culture? Well, I mean, that's their culture.
That's why they're better wrestlers and beat the women.
Well, yeah, they play or wrestle the women, yeah. Because you can do anything you want, but when you bury that person and you dig up their bones 1,000 years from now, you're only going to have one of two genders, like you said. They're going to look at the bones and they're going to say this was a male or this was a female. They're not going to say this was a male that transitioned or this is a female that transitioned. Because psychology doesn't change bone structure or DNA. And it doesn't change the fact that in the beginning, the Bible says God made them male and female. So, let's see. Yeah, Genesis chapter 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Okay, that's right there. Yeah, it's complicated, isn't it? What do you suppose that means in the Hebrew? It means male and female. So.
Do you suggest that people go vote early to avoid the lines?
Well, some people have voted early. How long did you wait in line when you voted to?
Well, that was the first day of voting in Summit County, and that was just 2 hours.
So, so I mean, it all depends on where you're going and when you get there. I mean, I don't know what it'll be like in Summit County, for instance, but now, what was it? I heard Secretary of State Frank LaRose said, and Kim and I are still trying to figure this one out. He said Ohio has a historic high number of people registered to vote. And he said, what was it? 8 million.
No.
Or was it 7 million? It was 8 million, yeah. Yeah, it was 8 million. He said 8 million have registered to
That
vote.
seems awfully high.
I know, because isn't Ohio's population only about 11 million?
Yeah.
So that leaves you 3 million to be the kids and the people who aren't registered, for whatever reason. Yeah, it just seems a little high.
That doesn't make any sense at all. I was wondering that same thing, if these numbers are gonna come in
Mm-hmm.
above like last election was about 130 million, if I recall correctly. It could be off a little bit. But
Yeah.
I'm curious if it's gonna come in much above that.
But if we're getting a huge turnout, regardless of the amount that are registered, if we're getting a huge turnout prior to election day, then it may be that election day really doesn't have that big of a line. And also that depends on where you're at. Because if you're in Akron or in Cleveland or in, some larger area, especially at a voting location that has several precincts represented, you'll have a larger line. But if you're out where Cliff Works, the polls out in Richfield Township where there's 2 precincts, it probably won't be that large of a line.
Where do you go for early voting anyways?
County Board of Elections
Okay.
in Akron for Summit County. And have you heard anything about the election yet? I haven't yet either.
We went to the poll worker training on Wednesday, and they told us they're gonna have half the number of booths that they normally do.
You went to poll worker training?
Yeah.
He's new, and they did say they were gonna be
Summit County?
good.
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
Cause I even called them up
They
and
said they
find
had,
out why I hadn't heard anything, and they said, well, send something to me, I won't worry about it.
they said they had 5,000 people involved, somewhere around five, they need like 1,800 or something, people to staff polls in Summit County. They had 5,000 respond. And so many people respond, they couldn't even train them all. Ashley and I got our applications in apparently early enough to be trained, and they actually did call us today asking us to staff a precinct somewhere, but
Mhm.
don't know where yet.
They don't know where yet either.
And another thing that has helped considerably, and I know there's some variation county to county, but for instance, in Summit County, we used to have, each precinct had its own table. So we'd be sitting in our precinct with one person or not, or nobody, and I'd look at the table over there, and they'd have a line out to the door. And I'd look at the table over there, and they had, 3 or 4 people, and we're sitting here with maybe one. But now they have this combined thing where you come in because you have this little tablet thing that maybe roughly the size of what Kim's got for her notepad here. And when you give your ID and they scan it, it comes up and it tells on there what precinct you're in. And so the people behind us have ballots, and in some cases, there's precinct specific ballots. Now, some cases there's not, but if in the case of there's certain like school levies, for instance, in Richfield Village, there's in Richfield Township, there's a portion of the township that's in the Woodridge School District, but the rest of it's in the Revere School District. And in Copley Township, there's a portion in the Fairlawn Copley School District and a portion in the Revere School District, and I think a portion in the Norton School District. So depending on where you live, you might live in that town, but your precinct might have some specific thing. So that's why they have to keep track of the precincts. Because if you're voting for something that's precinct specific, you need a ballot for just that precinct. And but we can do that all now, so it avoids having one table with a big long line out the door and another table with 2 or 3. Because everybody can come up, and it doesn't matter which one of the terminals that you're at, they all access the same thing, and it pops up, and then the people behind us have all of the ballots for the precincts, and we just tell them, we need the precinct A, and they give us precinct A, or precinct B, and they give us precinct B. And so it really speeds it up over where it used to be. So it's going to be anybody's guess right now, because with all the heavy early turnout, I'm expecting it might not be as heavy on an election day as it normally would be for a presidential election.
And the mail-in voting.
Yeah, and the mail-in voting.
Absentee.
So I could be surprised. We may be busy all day. But
So
do
you're saying
pray.
with any luck, Trump will have won before November 3rd?
Well, it would be good, and it would
That
be
would
good
be
to
great.
confirm it on November 3rd. But we do need to pray for safety. I don't foresee Richfield Village or Richfield Township being a hotbed of protest activity or unrest. But for somebody who's in Akron or in Cleveland or something like that, there you may have potential for problems.
My neighbor's got his flag flying upside down. He's in distress.
And that actually might be reason, if you're in an area where you might suspect that your polling location might not be a safe place, you might want to go vote early. Because then, you don't have to worry about it. And of course, you can do like Nancy did with the absentee ballot and put it in the box, it's in there. Or you can go to the BOE and go and get in there and you know it's in there.
And we're thinking about going tomorrow.
I prefer to put my ballot in the ballot machine myself.
And hear it beep.
Yeah.
Know that
Watch
it's in.
the screen.
That's what I like. I think this is the best way to do it.
When you were waiting for 2 hours, it was peaceful or was it?
It was peaceful. One guy fell down, waiting, and that article appeared in the paper about him being lifted up and set in a chair in front of the voting office. But they never brought out, they should have brought out a curbside ballot for him to vote on.
Mhm.
The ambulance came and he refused it. And then after a while, another ambulance came and he finally went, but he never did vote. Somebody told him he could have voted. He didn't know they asked for a curbside ballot. He could have, and he would have. But eventually he voted. The article on the Beacon said that he did vote that week.
So, and even if you have voted, you can always go near where the polling station is and watch.
Have play cards.
Yeah, as long as you're outside the boundary. As we mark a boundary, and it's got flags, and you can pass out, campaign literature, suggested votes, wave a sign for your candidate, whatever you want to do, all day long
How
if you
much
want
the
to.
distance from the actual voting area for that?
Well, it's supposed to be 100 feet, but that I've suggested over the years, they should give us a rope that's 100 feet long in case somebody comes up and challenges us and says, this thing is setting at 99 or 99 feet and 11 inches. I should be able to have my toes right here. Yes.
They're gonna give you 6-foot ropes this year.
Or
So you can put your roofs 6,
And so you can mark 6-foot dots.
and you have to
Just
mark
stand
X is 6 foot away
Wow.
with painter's tape.
now I think I would have to object because that's too close to stumping for Biden. Anybody that's ever seen his campaign things, they got all these 6-foot markers on everywhere.
It's almost cool what the Democratic Party's doing to him. He's got dementia. If you look at him,
Actually, he might have Parkinson's. He's got he might have both.
I mean, because you look at that, he stumbled on his speech a couple of times. He's
Mhm.
got that glazed over blank stare.
They're planning to make Camel here the president.
Yeah.
This is about Harris.
Yeah, this is just a way to get her in there. They couldn't get her through in the primaries. She really failed miserably in the primaries.
And I think he's playing a lot of this stuff too, in a sense, because I've talked to Democrats that are like, oh, don't you pick on Joe.
Mhm.
Don't you, he's, have a little sympathy. That's what I'm, when I say, I think the man might have
But there's
dementia or something, they're like,
Well,
don't you pick on him.
there's the Parkinson's evidence. He's got the resting tremors because you'll see him. There's videos where you can see he's sitting there and you'll see his hand doing this while
Yeah,
he's
I
sitting
know,
there,
I've seen
or he's standing there. You'll see his hand to the side going like this. And the other thing that he does, most people when they walk, their heel goes onto the ground with their toes up, and they go forward, and they go like that. People with Parkinson's lift their heel and kind of drag their toe, and they lean forward abnormally because they just kind of shuffle and drag their toe and down. And he does that. He has the Parkinson's gait. I'm not saying he has Parkinson's, but he's symptomatic.
Well, I don't see him.
And the memory lapses and the dementia as you get further along in it.
I just don't see how he could be a mentally fit candidate.
No, if he was a Republican, the media would be going crazy with all these things about how unfit he is. Instead, think of this. Did anybody see both town halls last night? I was flipping back between the two.
I watched the first one and I recorded the second one, so I got to watch both of them.
Well, I was flipping back between them. So here's President Trump, just recovered from the coronavirus that was going to kill him, or so did the leftists hope. He's sitting on the edge of the stool like this saying, Well, listen, and he's very animated and very, into what he's saying. And then you flip over to Biden, yeah, I think that we're gonna ban fracking, and then you go back to Trump. He's now listen. This is what's happening. Then you go back to Biden.
And then,
How can you not see the difference between the two?
and then the one on NBC, the questioning was like an interrogation.
Oh, yeah, it was very adversarial.
And then on
And then you-
NBC, it's just fluff and stuff.
Oh, and there was Stephanopoulos there
They're-
helping him out. Come on, Joe.
Yeah.
Let me coach you a little more, Joe. Here. And then you look at the scenery. President Trump was outside. It was in Florida, I believe. And you can see people around, and it looks full of light.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the studio where Biden was, it's all dark, and you see a couple of shadowy figures up there that stand up every once in a while. It's like, is there anybody even there?
Yeah, all of a sudden, someone appeared in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Asked-
And they usually, when they get in the spotlight, they're going, Carol wants to see something.
Did Biden take questions like Trump did?
Yeah, but I think he knew in advance what they were. He also had something in his ear. You could see it in his ear, and you could see him going, and then and then he would say something, and then and then he'd start giving an answer again. It's like somebody was feeding him in his ear.
I saw something.
Yeah. So,
These people know that.
oh, I know. They know it. There's
One guy was standing way up in the balcony,
oh yeah.
and he looked up, and he asked him a question, Biden said, "Don't jump."
Yeah, he's trying to be funny with some of his answers. And
Well, did he say something where he was saying, I'm a registered Democrat and I'm running for Senate?
Yeah.
yeah,
He said that in Toledo.
He said that in Toledo just recently. Yeah, because I had posted that online and said, well, I'm glad to know he's not running for president anymore, at least. But I thought you had to live in Ohio to run as senator in Ohio. I'm not sure how that works. But
Are they gonna have a debate, a third one, or no?
I think
They are?
they're supposed to have one, but
Yeah, so
Is it
It's
confirmed?
scheduled,
next
but
week.
there's no reason they couldn't have done it last night because President Trump has been cleared by the doctors. He's passed the quarantine time. There was absolutely no reason they could not have done it.
Well, their decision not to have one was arbitrary. They didn't tell them in advance. They just
No.
said, this is what we're gonna do. It's gonna be
Yeah,
It is.
virtual.
yeah, it was in that presidential debate commission is not a friend of the Republican side of things.
Questions about his son?
Didn't information come out that they conspired to give Biden advance information of the questions?
I think that was a given, yeah, then even going into it.
And
Oh,
one
and
fellow claimed that his account was hacked, that's why his Twitter thing had, and then it turned out he was lying that it was hacked, so what he had said was true.
that was the guy who was supposed to be heading up that, the guy question answer guy for that last, this
Yeah.
debate the other night.
well, and I was gonna say, on the Biden one too, did you notice he answers his question, has a little discussion, and then it's commercial. And the commercial segment lasted as long or longer than the time that Biden was on camera. And then they come back, you do another question or two, a little discussion, and then off to another break. A great way to help somebody that's not doing too good look better. How many commercial breaks did they take with Trump?
Well, I don't remember.
Did you like it when Pence was, when they were doing with Pence and Harris?
Oh, and Harris? Yeah.
Pence, he was, I mean,
When he's
he was that, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah, that was excellent.
Pretty good.
We should not be surprised at anything.
Oh, no, and we're not to the election yet. And even when we get to the election, it's still not going to be over because they're going to be finding palletfuls of ballots for Biden for a week, 2 weeks, a month after the election. And we're going to see all this stuff going to the courts. This is why we need to also pray that Judge Barrett gets put onto the court because they need the full court. Because there's gonna be challenges.
Is that why you have people at the cemetery taking pictures on the gravesites?
They're memorizing the names. Oh, did anybody catch the thing where when President Trump had his first in-person rally after all the coronavirus stuff, remember, in Arizona? And they had all these ticket reservations, and they thought, man, this place could be bursting at the seams. And then they couldn't fill the stadium. And they ridiculed the president over that. Well, what it was internet trolls went online and they reserved all those tickets and then didn't use them. Well, he was at a recent campaign and he out-trolled the trolls. What it was is it was an outside location in a big parking lot area, and they put online, if you want to be there, you got to register and give a $5 non-refundable fee. And they had some 3,000 plus people register and not show up. And it was the same trolls. And they thought, ha, 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 we really got him. It was a parking lot. There was no limit on how many people could be there. But what happened was they ended up contributing over $15,000 to the Trump campaign, and they got their email addresses and all of that stuff, which are on mailing lists that now can be sold to generate more money for the Trump campaign.
They caught one of the ladies who was advocating on like TikTok for that.
Yeah, TikTok was doing it, yeah. But yeah, they netted a tidy little profit off from that one. But the so-called evangelicals for Biden are really trying to drum up stuff too. And Ed had where he's over there. There you are. You gave me that one. I got it here. This was from back in August, but it's really good. Letter to an anti-Trump Christian friend. And this is, well, I mean, we don't have time to read it, obviously, but this is well worth looking at. And this came from, let's see, where did it come from? Wayne Gruden. I was wondering if he had Town Hall. Okay, yeah, I was wondering if he had the thing on there. Yeah, from townhall.com. Wayne Grudem, it's spelled Grudem, and it was published on August the 8th. This would actually be well worth taking the time to look up. But there's this effort to try and make it look un-Christian to vote for President Trump. And remember, we had that Real Christian Voting Guide that we saw from that so-called church in East Cleveland.
I seen there was a certain Baptist church that was making supplies for a school system. And it reminded me of a certain United Church of Christ of giving gift baskets. They watered down, didn't even have the message of truth anymore.
Well, and we all have family members, co-workers, people that we associate with one way or another, like you were saying, who look at us like we're crazy. And I've dealt with several of them as well. And it's really a shame that so many people, and many of them intelligent people, are either completely blinded themselves or they're willingly ignorant. And unfortunately, that's the case with a lot of them. They're willingly ignorant. They go to churches where the pastor says, we don't talk about politics, and then goes on to preach a sermon about how evil people are who are racist, and the whole way through they imply that the president is this evil racist that's against people and wants to kick puppies and things like that. But we don't talk about politics. And And then they'll preach about how, oh, there's these people who call themselves Christians out there. They're only focused on whether or not somebody's pro-life. They don't care about whether or not they're for open borders. They don't care about whether or not they're for livable minimum wage, and things like that. That's all more important than life, obviously. And that Real Christian Voter Guide is just symptomatic of many so-called churches out there.
Now, the realistic question now is how many of these churches are going to fall into the Antichrist system?
Well, I can think of several that'll go right in there hook, line, and sinker because they don't have Christ in them to begin with. They've already got the spirit of
It's so they have to
Antichrist.
see it on the outside.
Because I was looking at that, like what Matthew is talking,
What chapter?
Matthew chapter 4, 8, when he says, "And the devil taketh him up into exceedingly high mountain, sheweth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glories of them." So, I mean, he is the God of this world. The kingdoms of this world are his.
Yeah, because notice when Jesus rebukes him, he never says anything about the offering of the kingdoms, because in the other things that he says, for instance, he was hungry here after 40 days and 40 nights. Verse 3, it says, when the tempter came to him and said, "If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread." And he answered and said, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God." So in his rebuke, he referenced the thing about offering, tempting him to make the stones turn into bread. And that bread is not all that we need. We need the word of God. We don't need just physical food. We need spiritual food. And then it says in verse 5, then the devil taketh him up into the holy city and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple and saith unto him, "If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone."
You can even see where it says, how he's the accuser too.
Yeah.
You look at that railing accusation.
Yeah. Jesus said unto him, "It is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God." So he rebukes him, and he also in the rebuke, he's rebuking the temptation of casting yourself off from the temple. That's, you don't throw yourself into things saying, "Well, I'll just let God take care of it." You're supposed to have some thought here.
You don't put the Lord to a foolish test.
Exactly. And so he said, "Don't tempt the Lord your God. Thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God." So now we come into verse 8, and again the devil taketh him up into exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto him, "All these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me." Then saith Jesus unto him, "Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." There's no mention of the offer of the kingdoms. What he does rebuke him on is the request for Jesus to worship him. And he says, that's what you can't do. He didn't rebuke him on the other, because like you said, he's the God of this world. And he has a certain level of sovereignty over the world, because the world, under Adam as our chief forefather, rejected God for the devil. And that's basically what he did in the Garden of Eden. He rejected God for the devil. And so ever since then, the world has been under the sovereignty of the devil. But God overall still has a plan. But because the devil has a certain legitimate claim to sovereignty over the world, the devil is able to do certain things. But he's constrained by God's overall sovereignty. So he is a ruler over this world. He's the God of this world. And he had the legitimate opportunity to offer to Jesus the kingdoms of the world. I'll give them to you. I will cede my sovereignty to you if you'll just bow down and worship me. Well, what would that have done if Jesus had done that? Well, Jesus would have been proven not to be God, right?
Right.
He couldn't have been God in the flesh if he did that. And if he's truly God, and then he did this, one could make the argument, wouldn't that destroy God?
All right, yeah, he would cease to be.
Yeah, because he would
Yes.
internally be destroyed. Well, that's an impossibility. So Jesus couldn't do this and wouldn't do this. And as a consequence, it didn't happen. But see, think of it this way. The devil is, in some senses, well, I was going to say, in some senses, the devil's the most desperate entity in all of creation, because he knows better than anybody else, certainly better than we do, the power that God has. And his only hope is to destroy God if he wants to avoid the lake of fire for all eternity. He has absolutely no other hope. There's no way the devil can avoid the lake of fire for all eternity. I think he knows that. Unless he can somehow destroy God, but he can't do that. That makes him, in a sense, the most desperate of characters.
He tried the only chance he had, and it was a ridiculous.
Exactly. Because, and not only does it make him desperate, he's the biggest fool that there is. He's a bigger fool than the fool that says there is no God. Because he's the fool that says there is a God who's greater than everything, and I'm going to destroy him. And he can't. And I think he knows that he can't. But he's so desperate because it's the only chance he has, even though it's a no chance.
Look at that whole scenario too. When he fell,
Mm-hmm.
he was enticed by his own lusts, essentially, and lifted up
Yeah,
pride.
his own pride.
Because before somebody sins like that, lust is conceived, essentially for anything. And when it's conceived, then death, yes, like it says. And right.
Well, and he was the
Pondering on
anointed.
that.
He was the anointed cherub which covereth, and he's described as having all these gemstones as a part of his clothes. And if you look at Revelation chapter 4, you have in Revelation chapter 4, let's see here. You have Revelation chapter 4, this picture, the throne room of God, okay? And as God is on the throne there, John sees this, and it says in verse 6, and before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto a crystal. And in the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were four beasts full of eyes before and behind. And pause there for a minute. When it says beast, it's not meaning like some terrible monster or something. It just means a living being. A beast, a living being.
Well, like it says, he who regardeth his beast is wise. So
Yeah, because it's a living being.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got these four living beings, and it gives a description of them. And what they're doing, it says in verse 4 or 10, it says verse, where is it? They're flying around there. And, let's keep reading in verse 8 here. It says, the four beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. Now, let me read 9 as well. And when those beasts give glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever, and then it talks about the 4 and 24 elders come up. But you have these four beings going around the throne of God, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. They're going around it. Now, I'll admit this part here is my supposition. When the Bible says that Lucifer was the anointed cherub which covereth, could it be that his function was to hover over the throne of God? And with all of the gemstones that was in his makeup, could you imagine the sight that would have been? The light of the glory of God going up, and as these others are going around and around, and the light of God shining and reflecting and refracting off all those gemstones, and shining out from the throne of God. What an incredible sight. And here's Lucifer up there thinking, after a while, people are looking at me, leading to the pride that starts in the heart. People, and the angels are looking at me. They're looking at me. I'm above him. They're looking at me.
Beginning to think, aren't I great and don't I make God look good?
Yeah, exactly. And that's all speculation, of course, but
Some of those I can see color.
yeah, because then think about it. In the new heaven and the new earth, back in Revelation chapter 20, you see the Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. Look what you see there. In a sense, we get to replace the position that Lucifer had in a rough sense, because when it talks about chapter 21, rather, Revelation chapter 21, when we get down toward the end of the chapter, after the description of the city and all of the incredible gems and things that are described as the walls and the foundations and the streets of gold and all this sort of stuff, and then it says in verse number 22, and I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it, and the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. See, this says nothing about whether there's not a sun and a moon in the new heaven and the new earth. This just talks about the city doesn't need a sun or a moon, because the light of God is shining out. God is present in this city. And as the light of God shines out through this city, which is described as the dwelling place of the bride of Christ, which is us, believers in this dispensation. And as the light of God shines and it reflects and refracts through all of those gemstones and the gold and everything that's there, and that light in iridescent colors and everything flashing and sparkling out, it shines over the earth. And it says in verse 24, and the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And we've talked about it before, as it comes down from God out of heaven. I don't believe it's going to set on the earth. I think it's going to hover over the earth, in a sense like another moon, only it'll be light shining out from it. And whenever, because there's these nations on the earth, we know from the scripture there's Old Testament saints, there's the tribulation saints, and there's the saints prior to the flood, and different groups of saints, the Old Testament Gentile saints, the Old Testament Jewish believers, and you got all these different groups. They're going to be on the new earth in these areas. And where they're there, there's leaders of those nations, because it says there the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And they'll be coming to visit where God's presence is in this new heaven and new earth situation. And his presence, guess who will be living right there? The bride of Christ. John, I was talking about this, I filled in for Pastor Lutz on the radio today. And in John chapter 14, in my Father's house, what did Jesus say? Many mansions. And what did he say he's going to do? I'm going to do what? Prepare a place for you. What did they do in the Jewish wedding ceremony? The groom went to his father's house and he prepared a place. When it was ready, he went and received his bride and brought her back to the place that he prepared for her. And even the beginning of chapter 21 here in Revelation says in verse 1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. It's a prepared place.
Amen.
And that's where we're going to be, because in verse number says, and there came unto me one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials full of the seven last plagues, and talked with me, saying, come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. And what does he show him? He shows him this new city that come down from God out of heaven to the earth. because that's where the bride lives. You want to take them to see the bride? You take them to where the bride's home is, which is the New Jerusalem.
He has that in 14 twice.
Mhm.
He says, I go to
Prepare a place for you. And
the
if,
latter part.
yeah, he said, if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that there you may be also. Yeah. And so this is exciting because we are in the dispensation where believers today make up the bride of Christ. And when the rapture takes place, we're going to be received up to him. We're going to go to this place that he's prepared for us. And then at the end of after the millennial kingdom goes through, and after, the devil is released for a little season, and then the final great white throne judgment and all that takes place, the new heaven and the new earth, and this city coming from God, prepared, hovering over the new earth. And the believers, all the ages.
Actually, before that, doesn't there, everything will be dissolved in fire or?
Yeah,
That
Peter writes
fire
about
shall
that.
dissolve,
Yeah,
right?
and the elements melt with a fervent heat.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a new heaven and a new earth.
Yeah, or.
And that new heaven and the new earth. Now, at the same time, Revelation 14 says that the lake of fire will always be there because the smoke of their torment ascendeth up forever and ever. But we who know Christ as our Savior, this is our dwelling place. And because God's going to create a new physical universe that's now untainted by sin. This universe right now needs more than a renovation.
Yeah.
It needs a complete do-over. It needs a complete rebuild. And he's going to melt, the elements melt with a fervent heat, the Bible says. And so a new heaven and a new earth, I believe he's talking about the physical creation that we're going to dwell in. And we're going to have all eternity to explore an incredibly vast universe. I mean, think about the universe that we see right now. Every time they develop a more powerful telescope, what do they find? More and more, not just stars, but galaxies that they never even knew existed. You look into the night sky, and some of what we take to be a star, this time of year, Orion's starting to come up late at night now. And a little later on, there's one of the areas, I think it's in Orion, it's actually a galaxy. Yeah, yeah. When you see Orion rising, cold weather's coming. Yeah, and some of those what we look at as stars are actually galaxies. And they've trained telescopes onto what looks like blank areas of the night sky, and they put some powerful telescopes on, and they found out it's filled with galaxies. And each one of those galaxies is probably as bigger than our galaxy. What is God creating all that for? I think he's created more than just to look nice.
Oh, yeah, they're gonna be populated.
We get to explore it. We'll have
be doing forever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know that we're going to be having, there's not going to be an increase in the number of human beings probably during the new heaven, but we have more than enough that everybody could have their own series of galaxies to explore. There's always going to be something to do, something to learn, something to discover.
Well, that's.
It's just amazing.
Yeah, he's not gonna overload us with information for that period. No reason to be boring.
No, they're not, like we said, not going to be sitting on a cloud, strumming a harp, eating Philadelphia cream cheese for all eternity. I mean, I like cream cheese, but even that, I'd like at least a little variation. A different type of cheese, at least. I mean, maybe a different cloud or something.
Well, I think what you said, you'll have everything will be back it will be back in a rhythmic harmony.
Yeah, it'll be like what it was created to be, because if you speculate, what if Adam had not sinned? And he continued to live forever and had children and they lived forever, we'd have filled the earth up pretty quick.
Maybe need the whole galaxy.
Maybe that's why I had a whole universe. It was there for us to explore and to populate. But we didn't, because Adam messed up. So now we're going to have the universe given to us again to explore. And I rather think that God's going to have some amazing things for us to discover. When you just look at what we see now in the universe, there's just some amazing things. You know, you when they first developed the telescope, they discovered things they never knew existed.
Well, I know we
Never
gotta
even
be
imagined.
vigilant ourselves because, so, speaking of which, so we don't get knocked off track by the enemy. You know, like in Ephesians 6:11, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because that's his goal too.
Oh yeah, he wants to sideline us.
Side it right,
And
distract us and
you know, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the things that are happening in the news. But you know, that's again, what is that? Luke 21, I think it is, where he says,
I know they're lying to me when I turn the news on, so I don't worry
Yeah.
about it. So.
if you already know they're lying, you're a couple steps ahead of the game. So, yeah, Luke chapter 21. Yeah, he's talking about what's going to happen as we get into the tribulation and the end of the tribulation, and let's jump in verse 25. Because he's talking about events during the tribulation and toward the end of the tribulation. And verse 25, and there shall be signs in the sun. This is Luke chapter 21, verse 25. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. So we know we're not talking about present day here. We're talking about lead up to when the Lord returns at the end of the tribulation, because that's when you're going to see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And that's where Jesus then says, and when these things begin to come to pass, then look up and lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. So we don't have to see the end result and the end of the tribulation. It's saying we see these things begin to come to pass. Well, what do we think we're seeing now? These things beginning to come to pass. You know, we're talking about the vaccine and then different things, the world government trying to form, and yeah, people's hearts failing for fear. And I just heard of a pastor, a former pastor, who 55 years old, I believe, just died of a heart attack. You know, I don't know that his heart failed for fear, but you know, fear can cause heart attacks. The stress, the anxiety, and anxiety is a form of fear.
Well, look at animals like rodents. You scare them enough. I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they die of heart attacks all the time.
and they're, you know, for fear and for looking for those things which are coming on the earth. You know, get overwhelmed with what we see happening. And
Well, there's a lot of events that can transpire. I mean, you're talking potential for global war.
yeah, but we see these things, and in fact, you look in the rest of chapter 21 that we weren't looking at. You know, he starts talking about this in. He's asked in verse number 7, and they asked him, saying, Master, when shall these things be, and what shall be, what sign will there be when these things shall come to pass? And then he begins giving a series of things that are going to happen, culminating in the return of Christ when they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And as you look at these things, many of these things have been taking place for centuries. Verse 8, and he said, Take heed that ye be not deceived, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and the time draweth near, go ye not therefore after them. Well, are there false Christs in the world today?
Yes, there are, absolutely.
Yeah. And have there been for some time?
Well, it says
Absolutely.
anyone that confesses Jesus Christ did not come in the flesh is a deceiver.
Yeah, but he's talking about people who are going to claim to be Christ. And look at verse 9. When you shall hear wars and commotions. Well, we've been hearing about that for a while too, haven't we? Let's see. Then he said in verse 10, they said unto them, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. great earthquakes in diverse places in verse 11, famines, pestilences, fearful sights, great signs from heaven. Verse 12, but before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up from the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And we've certainly seen that for centuries, but it'll be advanced during the tribulation period, especially when the Antichrist begins to persecute the followers of Christ and the Jewish people. They will be persecuted severely during that time. And so there's an address, really, we're looking at things that are going to be happening during the tribulation, but we're seeing these things happen today.
The Jews in New York.
The Jews in New York, where the mayor has just basically laid down a law to them. Talk about anti-Semitic restrictions. Yeah.
I didn't even hear what that was. We'll discuss it afterwards.
Can they peacefully protest that?
Not if they gather in
Well,
groups of more than two, I think.
They were peacefully protested, the governor would, or the mayor wouldn't have any of it.
That's what I said, not unless they gather, not if they gather in groups of two or more. Means like only one person, and even that's gonna be suspect. I mean, it's ridiculous. Yeah, what was it, Biden said that if he becomes president, he might pass executive orders and try to get legislation through that'll mandate every state mask and limitation on gatherings, how many people can gather together and everything. If that's not enough to want to keep somebody who loves the Constitution from voting for him, I don't know what would. You say,
But WHO says, mass shutdowns aren't the answer anymore.
yeah,
So what does the science really say?
yeah. Well, the CDC had that study that showed that 85% of the people who got
Who wore masks.
COVID were people who wore masks always or frequently.
Let's think
As
if everybody
opposed-
that's currently working would just stop working.
Yeah, and granted, it was a small study, a small sample size, and it just showed what happened in that group, but it does suggest that the mask wearing maybe isn't as good. Maybe, well, you know, look at Neil's charts that he put up there, one over there and one over there. Back in May, where you can see it was just slightly higher than it is now currently. We were told back in May, masks will do no good. In fact, might be worse. And now that it's almost like they want the number of cases to go up, the number of deaths to go up.
They're not saying anything about the deaths because that's not frightening. They talk about cases now.
Yeah, and I was just getting ready to point that out because you have the deaths.
Yes.
That's the deaths. Well, you know, when you've got when you see that chart, it's hard to get people frightened.
Well,
Because they look at it and they say, well, the number of deaths is dying off.
like I said,
As
it's
far as the fun.
conditioning
But-
the mindset of people, preparing them for the market.
Exactly.
Because what they're doing
Exactly.
is constantly getting everybody in a
Mhm.
rhythmic pattern to wear this
Yeah.
thing. And
And they did. They've actually said, the people have speculated now that if they got rid of all of the mask mandates, there's a lot of people who will not stop wearing masks right now. Because they've made it a habit where they think you have to.
well, here's the other thing now. Look at all these. It's an environmental hazard with the masks because you see all the masks all over. It's like trash.
Yeah, I know. That's why I keep joking, saying, "Where's the hazmat team when you need them?" There's a hazardous waste on the ground there.
Why is the EPA going after that?
That's- What would happen if you started calling the health department every time you saw a mask discarded on the
I
ground?
must have seen about 15 to 20.
What would happen if you called the health department and said, I want to report a hazardous situation here. There's a biohazard out in front of this store.
Well,
There's several biohazards.
Well, the thing is, like, if I pull a
It just-
vehicle in for my job and it's standing there on the shifter, it's just nasty. I don't want my hand touching somebody else with
Think about
somebody
that.
breathing on it, no matter what.
Anybody remember the days when they had fuzzy dice hanging from the rearview mirror instead of masks? Who'd have thought you wanted that back, huh?
But it's. But it's done, You're right, they've done an excellent job of conditioning, psychological conditioning.
Yeah.
Wasn't that what they say with indoctrination, they constantly implant,
Mhm.
repeatedly
Oh, yeah.
implant a thought into somebody,
Mhm.
even if it's wrong?
And social conditioning. What was it? Maybe somebody's heard about this experiment too. I'm trying to think how it went, but they had like a doctor's waiting room or something like that. And they had several people sitting in the room and they were all basically in on what was going on.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think how this went. And a person comes into the room and sits down. Well, every once in a while, like a bell would chime or something, and everybody would stand up. Well, the new person is like looking, and then after a while, the new person is standing up, and then they sit down, and then they start taking away the people who are part of the thing, and they start reducing it to where it's only the person who came in. And the bell rings and they stand up. And then they bring another new person in. And that person's in there, the bell rings, and they stand up. And of course, the other person's, why do you do that? And it's like, well, because you're supposed to. Nobody told them to. There's variations on that type of a
Yeah,
study.
if you look at what you're doing, if you don't wear a mask, you're evil, essentially. So, I mean, they're conditioning somebody for a new religious system.
Mm-hmm.
So it's,
Again, to me, mask is one thing, but when they start telling you you can't work if you don't take a vaccine, you can't travel if you don't take a vaccine, you can't get on a plane, you can't get on a bus, you can't get in a hotel, you can't come to this Bible study. The hotel will say you can't come in here unless you have a vaccine. Then what are you gonna do?
now how does Gates have so much power with this? Because he was a computer programmer.
But it's not just him.
Right.
He is
I think it's beyond money.
networked with
I think
Soros,
it's-
others like that.
I don't even think it's a money factor anymore with some of these people.
That's how he got there. That's not his reason for doing it, but
Yeah.
he's utilizing the money that he has to get what he wants.
And he's welcomed into the network because they do recruit people.
They're totally wicked.
Yeah, that Gary Carr that was with me on the radio a couple times earlier this year, they attempted to recruit him and he wouldn't do it.
Your vaccine needs updates every 5 minutes.
That's what it'll be.
You know?
And
What do you have- what do you have that
bringing up
booster
the
with that?
masks and everything, I wanted to remind everybody that, is it next week?
Yeah.
Next week, we are going to be out there because the scrapbook people who've been using this room longer than we have preempt us about twice a year. We were kind of hoping they wouldn't be here this fall. But we will be out there in the breakfast area and there's a solution. Just have a cup in your hand. You don't have to hang a thing in it. If you're drinking, you don't have to wear a mask
Crazy one.
because we don't want the hotel to get in trouble. The last thing we need is the hotel to get cited because, or somebody complain because of us. I don't know that anybody would necessarily complain, but,
You might have
Oh,
some
they will.
Karens.
for
coming.
knowledge
Yeah.
is for,
They will.
just everybody make sure you have a cup of something next week at all times.
Bring your own bottle.
I know, I just didn't.
We have cups. You just, if you're drinking or eating, if you just want to sit like this,
Well,
you're
it's almost
drinking
like-
and you're eating. And under state law or state mandates, if you're eating or drinking, you do not need to have a mask on.
Well, maybe it's like it's talking like before, like that's.
I'm just letting you know.
They're gonna inject nanoprobes into people and turn them into Borg.
Yeah.
You know, you're gonna.
Resistance is futile. You shall be assimilated, yes. But just
So they're gonna
like this
reprogram-
is all you gotta do. If you do this, according to state mandate, you're okay.
But do we need a mask on these things, right?
No.
Oh, we're not in
We're not in
California.
California.
Well, what you can
Does
say.
anybody know what she was talking about
You
there?
have the newest high-tech.
The governor of California has said if you go out to eat, you have your mask on. And if you take your mask off, take a bite, put your mask back on, chew your food up, swallow it, take your mask off, take a bite, put your mask back on, chew. But here's the problem. We already figured out what the problem is. You're supposed to wash your hands every time you touch your mask or take your mask on or off. So are they going to put a basin at the table? Because you would have to take your mask off, wash your hands, get your bite of food, put your mask back on, wash your hands, then get ready to get your next bite of food, take your mask off, wash your hands, your bite of food, put your mask back on, wash your hands. Because otherwise you'd be going to the bathroom back and forth to wash your hands between every bite as well, twice. And then, of course, now that you walk to the bathroom, you got to have your mask on. So you got to touch your hand here and you got to wash your hands. You never get to eat.
You put your steak and everything in a blender and you just drink it all.
It just, yeah. Well, you could do with that one, you could make masks like that one school that we were joking about the other day. No, it was the one high school band, the people who played the wind instruments.
Oh,
They had the regular mask, but they cut the whole front of it out.
you saw the one with the rubber squeeze ball.
Yeah.
The squeeze ball and that's what.
Well, you know, in the military, you had that little squeeze thing, a little rubber tube where you could put in, you could hook it to the canteen. Remember that, where you could have your chem warfare gear on, and you're in there and you had the mask. It had a little thing on the side of the mask, and you had a canteen that it screwed into the top of the canteen, and you could sip out of your canteen while wearing your mask.
Then maybe you need to wear that the next time you go to the grocery store.
Army surplus store, we need those.
I don't know. Personally, I think they ought to sell surplus spacesuits. Wouldn't that be better? You know, then we can all just
Well,
move around our own spacesuit.
what they're doing to, like, my sons are in high school and, you know, the kids today are just being totally indoctrinated. He didn't even have a sickness or a cold, but once some of the kids, and some of it, they're just manipulating the system.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're given so much leeway to stay home or just not participate if you're sick. All you have to do is say, well, I'm not feeling well. Well, you just, or in court, just stop everything for 14 days. But they're using language. He says, well, I can't come over to do yard work because, and I knew he just didn't want to do yard work. He says, because I have a cold and it would be irresponsible of me to come over. I'm like, what are you saying? He's like, well, you know, Dad, because of COVID and it's irresponsible. I could get you sick and you could go to church and get all the elderly sick at church. And I'm just like, where did you hear that? Well, that you don't know that?
You're not suggesting that teenagers would take advantage of the situation for their own benefit.
Well, there's some of that going on too. And that's like,
How
oh,
many
my
people-
son- I'm like,
That's why the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Look how many people probably in the workplace, some places they take advantage
oh,
of.
in our work, the whole second shift, as soon as they, yeah, it's, you know, and you see the managers and bosses just rolling their eyes.
Oh,
They're just so tired of it.
Joe was saying that about his shift, about times where half of them are gone because,
Picking up extra time.
yeah, he's picking up all kinds of extra time because these people are using the least little thing to say, oh, I better not come in. I don't want to get people sick.
That's right.
And,
That's what they're doing. There's no doubt about it.
yeah. But yeah, we're definitely living in the strangest of times.
Science,
Yeah.
science has the answer to the back to normal.
Don't think, just trust them because they're a scientist. And scientists have never been wrong, ever.
What was that verse with the avoiding science is so false or so?
Oh, Paul warned
So
Timothy.
called science. Yeah.
Yeah, science falsely so called. What is that, 1 Timothy, I think it is?
I was looking for that before, but.
Yeah, at the end of 1 Timothy, chapter 5 here, or 6 here. Yeah, verse 20. Oh, Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and opposition of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. Grace be with thee. Amen. And like I said, you know, science has never been wrong, have they? I mean, they always, look how it worked out for George Washington. The bleeding to let the bad blood out so he could recover.
What was there a thing, remember that back earlier, junk science was a big thing? Remember that?
Yeah, they still use the term. Or how about the people who resisted hand washing in the hospitals because that's foolishness?
The amount of science that's been overturned by more recent science far outweighs that science which hasn't been overturned.
And
Almost all of it's
yeah.
been overturned.
And we know that there's certain things that are going to be overturned and misinterpreted and things like that. And maybe sometimes the overturning is actually going in the right
It's
direction.
not science, it's speculation, because it's supposed to prove or disprove something
But see,
based on.
there's a reason that we're not supposed to be a technocracy. What I mean by a technocracy is where the scientists determine everything that's going to take place.
Like masks and
Mhm.
and vaccines.
Technocracy.
Yeah,
The
that's
people
bad news.
who are behind, who control the science. And science is not without politicking. I mean, look at the whole thing with the creation research. You know, for years, people were finding fossils of dinosaurs. You know, they're opening up these long leg bones on dinosaurs, and they're finding sticky red stuff in the bone, center of the bone. Now, what do you usually find? Anybody ever broken a large bone, you know, like making soup or something?
Narrow. Yeah, narrow.
Exactly. And it's what? And it's sticky. Well, how do you have a dinosaur bone that's millions and millions of years old with sticky red stuff in it? Or even better, a joint that has springy, stretchy tendon-like material in it. And they were finding this, and they were trying to report it, and the scientists refused to publish any of the studies showing this. And the scientists at the big universities and at the Smithsonian assured people this wasn't being found until finally they reached a point where so much of it had been found that it was really kind of hard to deny it anymore. So then they said, well, there are a few cases where perhaps the dinosaur bone fell in some iron-rich water and somehow that preserved the soft tissue.
Didn't they have somebody actually said, you know, look at this is actual physical, and Ben Grinder marks on here to make this component fit.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was a different one where they were changing them, yeah. But I'm talking about spongy material that shouldn't be there. Well, the spongy material that shouldn't be there could only be there if the bone was thousands of years old at the max, not millions and millions of years old. And so the scientists didn't want people to think that it's less than millions and millions of years old because it goes against what they prefer to teach. So science is just as corrupt as politics. That's why we're not supposed to be a technocracy. Because what we're supposed to do is we're supposed to be able to hear the science. Here's some scientists over here that assure us that this is the case. Here's some scientists over here that assure us that that's not the case. This is the case. And how do we know? We got conflicting things. Here's scientists saying you've got to wear a face mask or you'll die and you'll kill grandma along with it. You got other scientists over here saying face masks aren't going to help you, they're going to hurt you, and they might actually kill you. How do we know who to listen to? Well, that's where we're supposed to weigh the evidence. You don't have to be a scientist to be able to weigh the valid arguments, whether they're logical or make sense, you know, and, you know, think of it as a judge in the court. The judge in the court has the prosecutor who presents his case. He has the defense that presents his case. And what's the judge supposed to do? Weigh the evidence and make a decision. So what are we supposed to do? We have elected officials that are, now here's the theory, they're supposed to weigh the evidence, aren't they? And make a decision based on the best, most compelling evidence and logic. But that's not what they're doing. They decided they want to condition people for the New World Order.
That's right.
And so that's why they're going against sound, compelling scientific arguments and logic. You know,
Censoring.
when censoring
How is
anything
that
that doesn't go with their
How
story.
is their science not religion?
Well, in a sense it is,
Believing
yeah.
things that can't be proved, that's the
Mhm. Yeah, the evidence of things not seen and, but, so here you've got one group over here saying a mask can't protect you from a virus because the virus is so small it passed through the mask. Then you got another group over here saying, oh no, the mask will keep you from getting the virus. It'll block the virus. Well, we know that the virus is many times smaller than the holes in your mask, but trust us, the virus knows not to go through that mask.
But the CDC.
Which one makes more sense?
That those 8% or 85% that always wore a mask still got the virus anyway.
So that's what I'm getting at. So you look at that and you say, well, which makes more sense? I got a hole this big around and I'm throwing, ping pong balls at it. And they're going through it. Okay? It's not like I'm throwing basketballs at it and they're bouncing off from it. I'm throwing ping pong balls and they're going right through it. So if I've got a hole, relatively speaking, on my mask that's as big around as this room, and I'm throwing tiny marbles at it,
Yeah, they're gonna pass through.
why are they going to bounce off? Well, there's more open space than there. I mean, the size of the particle is so tiny.
The smoke goes right through all those masks.
Yes,
and the
because-
virus is much smaller than smoke.
The same people that tell you your mask will not block the smoke particles out west tell you it'll block the virus particle, which is much smaller. So here's where you make a judgment. Here's a scientific case made over here that the virus, which is much smaller than a smoke particle, trust us, won't go through your mask when the smoke particle will, because it's smart. It knows better than to go through that mask. And here's a guy over here who's a scientist who says, listen, if the particle is smaller than the hole sizes, it's going to go through.
Well, that's logical.
So you say, well, which makes more sense? You don't have to be a scientist to make the determination, the small particle is going to go through those huge holes with ease. That guy makes more sense than this guy that says the particle that's smaller than the smoke particle won't go through where the smoke particle will. He makes no sense. This guy makes sense.
OSHA said that 5 seconds after you put the mask on and you breathe in and out, the carbon dioxide is already.
Yes. It builds to unsafe levels.
Your quality of air.
Mhm. And so you look at these things, you say, which side makes more sense? Now, and what Martin says is absolutely true. You can see this stuff. I posted a video where this guy interviews these two women. Their job, they go around and they go into hospitals, they go into businesses, industries, and they fit them with masks and they test them and all. And they talk about the safety and the efficacy of masks in different settings and different situations. And they said that if they recommended doing what the government is telling us we have to do, they'd lose their jobs. They'd be sued.
Well, there's certain industries, like miners and that, they have certain masks and things.
Well, these two women, their job is to go to places
Well, why
and
do
test
they
their
say when you
masks.
wear a mask when you're in a hospital and it protects the people?
Well, now you're talking about certain situations,
Yeah.
certain types of masks,
Certain
and they
types
don't
of
wear them all the time. Because in an operating room, that surgeon is not standing there for 8-hour surgery wearing a mask the full 8 hours. He's out, he takes breaks. Plus, there's air circulation in the room designed to help counter the effects of wearing the mask. And
Plus other doctors.
and people circulate back and forth.
Well,
And
they've
had people in the operating room faint because of the carbon dioxide buildup.
You look at the aspect of if somebody sneezes or coughs, it doesn't keep down in the physical drop.
The droplets, when they're big, they cling to the
I can
mask.
understand that. That
And
makes
that's,
sense.
and that's the thing, because it is a droplet born.
Yeah, it
So, I mean,
catches the droplets.
In
But,
that aspect, yes, there's both sides have a point.
well, that's what I'm saying. You have to weigh
Just
the
wear a
argument.
space suit.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, my question is, assuming all this is true, and I tend to believe it is, exactly what's causing it to be spread? Has anybody stopped to just do a separate study, ignore all this other evidence, and start trying to figure out, well, what is
It's a
causing it? It's not
man-made
it's not being caused through masks. What's passing it from one
Well,
person to another.
if you sneeze or cough and it's in the droplets that you expel, and then it gets onto the eye or some mucous membrane, that's the area where the virus can get in you.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and yes, that's one of the reasons they're wearing that, so that if they cough, it'll catch the, but still some gets through. And they know some gets through, and then one of the studies is, does the virus become airborne? You just kind of float around. But what
And
I
it stays suspended in the air,
Suspended
is
in
the
the air.
difference in the air and airborne,
yeah, does it stay suspended in the air?
as opposed to
But-
just going from.
Yeah,
So sometimes
and
wearing
it's the
masks is helpful.
concentration, and it's the concentration of it too.
So sometimes wearing a mask is helpful.
On occasion, yes, and under certain circumstances, it is helpful. But mask wearing has more dangers than health benefits, because you're breeding all these germs in here, especially in the summertime where it's warm and moist. And you're touching things, touching your mask, touching things, touching your mask, and all those germs are building up there. But I wanted to get back to a point I was trying to make. We're supposed to be able to elect people who will make sound judgment for us and make policy based on sound judgment. But that's not what's happening. They're making policy based on what they want to accomplish.
That's right.
They admit, there was something DeWine did just recently, he admitted, I think it was, that, no, not DeWine, Governor Cuomo, there's a thing with his quotes, admitting they're purposely making people afraid to get the results they want. And see, that's not the right way to make policy. Those are, and that's where Moses, his father-in-law told him to select out honest men, godly men. And when they selected the first deacons in the book of Acts, they gave the same thing, godly men. This is where we want people who can make sound judgment.
That's right.
So you look at, you're looking at one guy, one candidate who can barely know where they're at and what they're doing from time to time, versus somebody who's alert. Who do you think makes a better judgment call when he has to make a judgment call? I mean, I would think the guy that's mentally
Where is
sharp.
that, what day it is?
Yeah.
And what office he's running for.
Yeah, and so that's the thing that should be done. But see, some of these people want a technocracy so that the scientists and technicians who have the greatest amount of pull can determine everything without having to have the middleman endorse it. And that's where some people would like to go with things.
Because the money down easier that way.
What's that?
It doesn't cost as much.
That's just as bad as,
In the long run, though. Yeah.
anybody that's on the floor telling them something, this just doesn't work.
Mhm.
The parts don't fit.
But that's where, when we were looking here at First Timothy, where he said to beware of avoiding profane and vain babblings in opposition of science falsely so called. You don't have to be a scientist to make valid judgments. You just have to be able to think. And the problem is, most people don't want to take the time to think. And if you're a born-again believer, in addition to thinking, we can ask God to help guide us and direct us. And too many Christians aren't even willing to do that. They just wait for somebody to tell them, and they don't think about what's being said.
Somebody born again will have an indwelling functions, certain things that just are right.
Very few scientists, very few real scientists.
Mhm.
They'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Most of it's junk science.
Yeah.
Almost all the scientists we got are junk science.
But that's where you have to make judgment calls oftentimes. And do we always make the right judgment call? Do our leaders in a perfect world always make the right judgment call? No, because we're fallible human beings. But hopefully, led by the Spirit of God, we can make the right judgment call more often than not and negotiate some of these. Science says this, science says that. And science is great if it's right. And it's horrible if it's wrong.
I just remember those signs where it says that science is real. Yeah, I can't think of the
Yeah.
rest of it.
But, I see where,
We
yeah,
believe in science.
yeah, we believe in science. Yeah, but I see we're after 9 o'clock, so we should be, and your clock is still there. Look at that. See how people get used to things?
Yeah.
All right.
That one we won't need it.
Let's go ahead and pray. Heavenly Father, Lord, I want to thank you for the time we could spend together here this evening. Thank you for the fellowship and the time we could spend looking into your word and talking about the things that are happening in the world around us. Father, we just pray you continue to bless now. Use us for your glory. Watch over us as we leave here tonight. Keep us safe on the road. Bless the day tomorrow and the day on Sunday especially, Lord. And then, Lord, we pray for next week, Lord, that you would just watch over us, Lord, and just pray that there'd be no problems, that we wouldn't have anybody that would be upset with us about masks or no masks and all that sort of stuff. Help us to be a good testimony for you, and help us, Lord, to make the right judgment call when we see these conflicting claims of science, Lord, and help us to be guided by your Spirit in all things. Father, thank you again. Bless, watch over us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
The first question I have was like, I love
It's in the first, second, and third John where it says, tested against the spirit, like you said, you pray and ask God and search the scripture on that particular topic.
And sometimes it's an element of trust, because he said, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. And granted, there may be a time or two where you have to say, well, I shouldn't go. But the overall principle that God has is we should be together. And so much the more as you see the day approaching. So when the governor of California says to the churches in California, you shall not meet, they should be saying, no, God says we shall meet. And we will. Yeah.
That's not talking about your regular system, getting together in the homes.
Try to lay down flat.
Well, and that's the way the churches met then too, because most of them didn't have buildings at that time. They met in people's homes. They met like this. Yeah, but they met like this because in Acts. Yeah. Because he said that daily and house to house, they house to daily, house to house, they met and they worshiped God and they studied the scriptures and on a daily basis. They weren't limited to just one day. Yeah.
Did I hear people with all positive blood don't get this?
I have heard that if you have type O blood, you are resistant. No, it's type O. It didn't say you're immune, it said you have a resistance. And it was something that was speculated earlier on. I'm type O as well.
Oh, is it?
I don't know.
And they also said that if you wear glasses, you might be more resistant because you're less likely to get stuff in your eyes.
Volkswagen.
So they won't wash them out? Probably it's just an excuse for them to save money.
I stopped in there.
This
Wow, that's. I know.
You don't want to. You want me.
yeah. Because the one place that I get place I get my oil change. Place I get my oil change, they give you a free car wash. It's a thing where it pulls you through. Nobody touches the car. Let me get this turned off here. All right, take care. Good night. Let me see here.
Car wash that you get there. That
Let
it can
me-
rain or.
No, that's all right. I'm just trying to get this signed off here. Trying to find where the arrow is. There it is. Come on. Oh, we're not ready yet.